and welcome to the South Cerney Trust's May Talk, based on the South Cerney players. I'm Sue Poulton, just in case some people do not recognise me. No one is allowed to go to the hairdressers, so please excuse my uneven fringe. I was asked to do this talk as I am Cerney born and bred. Having been in lockdown has been very hard for some people, but we are so fortunate living in the village with all the help and support from so many sources, and of course having had such fine weather. Well, this is a surprise, me visiting you in your sitting room instead of you being in the village hall. This is a first on-stream talk, or whatever it's called, from the Trust, and a huge first for me to produce it. This would not have happened without the help of my husband. With his techie knowledge, I can talk, but rather a dinosaur when it comes to really involved IT. What is so good about the talk is that you can visit the site at any time, which is convenient to you. You can keep your slippers on and relax in a comfortable chair. So it has its brighter moments. And depending on the time of day, you can drink your coffee or even a glass of wine. Comfort breaks can be taken without disturbing the audience. It is really sad, though, that we cannot all meet up with friends in the village hall. I'm sure we will be able to meet up again in the not too distant future. I don't mean to sound like the Queen there. The players have a long history in the village, so long that it is impossible to bring you all the years of performances. I have concentrated on the origins and personalities, trying to bring them to life for you. There are many past and present day members who are not mentioned, for which I really apologise. So, without further ado, let's get on with the proceedings. Sit back and relax, and I will see you later. The slide you see in front of you on your screens is of South Cerney as it was when the South Cerney players were formed. You will see how small it is compared to where we live today. You may want to press pause and locate where your house actually is in the village. A meeting was held here to discuss the forming of a dramatic society. This was met with great interest in 1935, and the South Cerney players were born. The second meeting was proposed and held in October in the hut. The hut was where the committee room is and was really a sturdy wooden building. Outside the back door was away the outside lavatories, complete with Izar toilet paper and carbolic soap. Here is a list of the original instigators of the South Cerney players. At the top of the list is Mrs. Smythe, who lived in Silver Street. She came along with her young daughter Alice Mary. Alice Mary Hatfield was the founder of the South Cerney Trust. Next we have Georgiana Peach, who lived at Anne Edwards College. Miss Peach was the original producer for the players. It was sad to note that at the following AGM, a 2-minute silence was held in memory of Miss Peach. The photo of the couple sat down are in fact William and Peggy Cripps, children of Captain Cripps. It was Captain Cripps that originally gave the village hall to the village. The last photograph is of William Griffith, who lived in School Lane and was my grandfather. 2 sisters attended the meeting, Maisie and Grace. Grace Johnson was the postmistress when the post office was in the High Street, and Maisie Johnson was the organist at the Congregational Chapel next door to the Old George. Miss Brimsfield was the school teacher. Also attending was Kate, who was the local poacher's sister, Miss Winnie Fox, who lived at Lower Mill, and lastly, Miss Molly Wheeler, a relation of Billy Wheeler. On the original committee was Hilda Gasser, Charles Mate and Sid Wakefield. Mr. Charlie Mate, who I have just mentioned, was a local butcher and greengrocer who drove a large green van. He was not very tall and used to peer through the steering wheel. We made sure we kept out of his way. He owned the old brewery in Upper Up and the Upper Mill in School Lane. His shop was next to the Elliot Arms. Adjacent to his shop was the slaughterhouse, where the drain led into the river Cern and fed the fish. Local boys would catch the fish and cycle into Cirencester and sell them to the fishmonger. His shop and slaughterhouse are now part of the Elliot Arms, and in fact the old slaughterhouse is now their honeymoon suite. Here you will see a photograph of Hilda, and the next photo is Hilda and Cyril Stevens. Cyril and Hilda married. Hilda was the longest serving member of the Players. She was a treasurer for 27 years, also a prompter, and even storing the flats in her barn. To acknowledge this service, the Players gave a seat in her memory, and here you can see Cyril with his 3 daughters in Silver Street. Rehearsals have now started for the South Cerney Players. Various places were used throughout the years for meetings and rehearsals. The hut, as previously mentioned, the schoolroom at the old school, Atkins Manor, the Elliot Arms hut. This was the hut behind the actual Elliot Arms building. It was also used as a skittle alley, and general elections were also held there. The Manor House and Century House, the home of Doreen Laws, and Broadway House, and Old Tiles. The Scout hut was used, and instead of a rent, the Players purchased new football outfits in 1981. Captain Cripps gave the stage to the South Cerney Players, and the roller blind, which was a heavy roller blind pulled up and down before and after the performances and between the acts, was painted by Miss Hall. This was a marvellous painting to behold. It was painted in the style of Monet. Miss Hall, just as an incidental note, painted the face of the Virgin Mary on the Mothers' Union flag, which is in our church. Miss Hall, of course, has her paintings on the Trust website. Rules were made for the running of the Players, and one rule stated that rehearsals must be punctually and loyally kept. Anyone over the age of 15, living or working in the village, was eligible to join the group, and the fee would be 2 and 6, paid annually. Subscriptions became a topic for most AGMs. The very first production, Their Business in Great Waters by Doris Parker, the Royal National Lifeboat Institution allowed this play to be performed without an acting fee. The performance was held on the 21st of February 1936. School children were only allowed to attend the dress rehearsal on the 19th of February. The price of tickets was proposed as 2 and 6 and 1 shilling. The profits from this performance were shared between the lifeboats, who received £2, 18 shillings and a penny, and the Village Hall General Fund received £5, 16 shillings and 2 pence. The plays was something extra to do in the village besides bell ringing, singing in the church choir, and the Scouting and Girl Guider movement. For each play following was the dilemma of hiring a radio gramophone for the evenings, and was discussed at great length each year as to the cost, hard to imagine now with all our modern technology. Another cost was the printing of posters, programmes and tickets, again not relevant today. Profits from plays were usually given to the village hall for items such as new flooring for the hut, new curtains and decorating. The last performance of the Players was just before the Second World War, was a variety show and a short play. The proceeds to go to the war charities and local Red Cross. There was a break in productions and the players were reformed on Tuesday, December the 9th, 1947. The play they decided to produce was Lord Richard in the Pantry. It was decreed that school children would be allowed to attend. As this was the first post-war production, the proceeds should be put into the Players' Fund. However, there was a deficit on this production of £1, 3 shillings and 3 pence. Here you will see other early members of the committee and players. Sid Wakefield, some may remember him as the village electrician along with Billy Wheeler. And then of course we have Cyril Stevens, who I'm sure everybody can remember. Sat down beneath him is Millie Garcer. Millie Garcer was Hilda Stevens' sister. Millie worked at the RAF camp, and also in her spare time when she wasn't acting or working, she was a caler to South Cerney cubs. Sat next to Millie is Sheila Luca from Luca's Stores, which is where the post office is by the fish and chip shop. Sheila, as a baby, was taken to Weston-super-Mare for a day once or twice in the summer by her parents, who pedalled on their tandem with Sheila in a sidecar. Next to Sheila is, in the white apron, is Kath Stevens, or Kathleen Stevens to give her proper name. Kath became Kath Beard and my aunt. Cyril was, as you all know, painter and decorator around the village for many, many years. He was also one of the stalwarts of the South Cerney players. He was a set builder, and when there was a lull, he would do caricatures of the players. This one you can see is of my father. The Ghost Train was a production for November 1948. Children were allowed to attend the dress rehearsal at the discretion of the headmaster. A £10 profit went to the Earl Haig Fund. The chairman spoke of the great strain and responsibility on the producer, Mr. Woodward. Mr. Woodward was the brother-in-law of Tom Griffith from Crane Farm, Bow Wow. The Ghost Train was performed again in 1986. The Camel's Back was produced in 1950, and it was proposed that profits be donated to the South Cerney Scouts, as the very faithful and long-serving set builder Charlie Lawrence was also very involved in helping the Scouts. Colonel Glynn, who lived at the Chapter Manor down Bow Wow, appeared not to be in a very good mood at this meeting, as he thought the photographer took far too long to take a photo and decided to sack him. He also thought that using the Wilson gloss was a complete waste of money. 1983 saw this play being again performed. Just note the front of the programme, where Friday the 13th is crossed off. Actors are renowned for being superstitious. In the mid-50s, some of the players were involved in putting on the village mumming play. This had been recently revived. Nothing had been written down previously, and Mrs. Peggy Fenton invited some of the older men from the village to come and tell her their recollections of the play from when they were younger. The mummers' play was put on in the village hall and was very entertaining, even down to using a pig's bladder as a balloon. Several pigs' bladders were obtained from the local butcher, and all were inflated in case one popped. Here is an extract from the mumming play. Bold Tanner has been knocked down by a blow to the leg, and Little John shouts, "Doctor, doctor, where bist thee? Old Bolt Tanner's wounded in the knee. £5,000 will I lay down, if a noble doctor could be found."
What, no more than that?
"Yes, £10,000 I will lay down, if a noble doctor can be found." There was great excitement in the village when the BBC asked that this mumming play be recorded for the wireless. All were tuned in the evening it was broadcast, and as children we were instructed not to talk during the show. It was strange to hear our play and recognisable voices coming out from the wireless. We only had to hope that a spider had not got into the wireless and would make it go buzzy. Here you will see a photograph of Ron Smith. Ron Smith lived at Amethyst, where the fish and chip shop is now. He was part-time verger in All Hallows Church, South Cerney, and he moved on to become verger in St George's Chapel. The next photograph is a photograph of Mike Cook. Mike Cook called his house Bow Wow, as he lived in Down Amney, and he used to live in Bow Wow. Mike sang tenor in the church choir and rang a church bell, as well as being a player. In 1959, there had been a slight disturbance by one of the audience, and the doorkeeper, now known as front of house, be asked that in future that they keep order. The disturbance may well have been a harmless, eccentric lady from the college, when the use of the college was for retired vicars, their widows, and spinster daughters. This lady, I should just call her Meg, some may well remember her, really enjoyed coming to the plays and would arrive early and take a seat centre of the front row. Backstage, the word would go out that Meg was in that night, and everyone would groan and wonder what she was going to do that evening. Meg would really immerse herself in the play and had been known to stand up and tell the players off. During A Murder Has Been Arranged, Millie Gasser and Lloyd Morgans of Morgans, Walker and Morgans, John Morgan's brother, a company of local builders, were having an argument on stage as written in the play. Meg thought this really was not on for a man to shout at a woman, and proceeded to stand up and go to front of stage and tell the young man off in a very loud voice. Her presence could be quite disturbing for the players. At the end of each play she attended, she would be on her feet at the end, clapping loudly and shouting "Bravo! Bravo!" at the top of her voice. Sadly, the village no longer has such harmless eccentrics. She certainly added to village life. For the Ghost Train, performed in 1948, on the programme there is listed a perruquier. Now, we've never had a perruquier before. I hope I've pronounced it right. And this is a wig maker, and it's never been seen on the programme since. Also, making props was Chris Laws was very good at making vases for smashing people over the head with. It seemed the first two were quite weak and smashed beautifully, but the third, on the final night, was a much heavier one, and it really did hurt. Last nights were always a bit of a tease for the actors. Cold tea was the normal standard for whiskey, and they used to slurp that down really quickly on stage. But on the last night, sometimes this was changed for the real stuff, which is rather a shock for the actor. The play this year was The Poltergeist, which made a loss. I went to see this play as a 9-year-old and was amazed how the vase flew off the mantelpiece as if on its own. I really thought the village hall was haunted. We had 31 members on the books, and it was pointed out that those who had not paid would not get a letter through the door. Here is a photograph of Margaret Franklin from Sisters Farm Bow Wow. Margaret looked after the properties for several years. She was also heavily involved in the Women's Institute, and the seat outside the village hall is placed in her memory. In 1960, finding enough men was becoming a real problem, and it was suggested we look outside the village. We looked at the RAF station to see if there were any young men there who were going to be forthcoming, but it seems no one was keen to join the South Cerney players. So at the AGM in 1961, it was sadly agreed to close the society due to lack of players, mainly men. There was a 5-year gap until the next meeting in 1966. Was this due to lack of men, or more people had cars and were able to travel afield, or maybe the majority of people had televisions and were happy to stay at home and watch the box? The Village Hall Committee had asked the players to remove scenery and equipment from the Village Hall. The lack of a producer was also a main problem. It was suggested that the players affiliate to the South Cerney Trust. A total of 3 theatre trips had been arranged during the lull of productions, but sadly each trip ended up in a loss and funds were needed to be taken from the players' account. It was stressed that this should not happen again. Theatre trips were taken to see Cods, Gods or Salos, Cods being Cheltenham Operatic Dramatic Society, or Gods being Gloucester Operatic Dramatic Society, or Salos being Swindon Amateur Light Operatic Society, the Swindon group putting on shows in one of the railway buildings, Oklahoma and West Side Story being 2 I can remember. During this lull in productions, the village choir, most of them involved in the players, put a show on the village hall. This was now what is considered non-PC. I do not wish to offend anyone, but it was as it was in the 1960s. The show was based on the minstrels, and all participating had their faces blackened with burnt corks, the story being based on songs of slavery. A producer had been found from the RAF camp at South Cerney, which was very fortunate for us. And when rehearsals were held at Atkins Manor, it was pointed out that only the actors should attend, as there was no room for anyone else. Again, the ownership of the stage reared its head, and at the AGM in 1967 it was pointed out that the stage is the property of the players. The chairman reported that the players had a very good year with 3 play readings, 1 production, and a visit from the county advisor on stage makeup. The advisor showed us how to build a beard on men so that it looked authentic. He also pointed out that it was easy to age actors. Unfortunately, it was impossible to make them look younger. November 1966 saw the players up and running again, having found a producer, and the play Love in a Mist was performed. The Standard criticised the choice of play, which was felt uncalled for, and that the choice of reporters should be closely watched in future. The chairman, Mrs. Peggy Fenton, said that words needed to be learnt much earlier to give the producer better backing. In 1967, we saw 60 members visiting the theatre in Cheltenham to see the play Bowing Bowing. The producer announced that he was moving to London and therefore unable to produce the next play. A play reading of A Lady Mislaid was read to much amusement. Notices of the AGM were delivered to the new people in Clark's Hay. Clark's Hay being the first estate to be built in the village, the new estate being Churn Close, Meadow Way and River Way. 1967, a murder has been arranged, and if you look at the cast you'll see the old familiar names coming up time after time. Players seem to go in waves, and as this lot grew older, another wave of fresh faces came in. This play made a deficit of £7, 13 shillings and 7 pence. The following year, Due again to a lack of a producer, there was not a play, but play readings continued and were great fun. They were held mainly down at Yvonne Perrott's at the Manor House in her Chinese room. Ownership of the stage reared its head again. The players relinquished their ownership of the stage, provided that they would not be responsible for any repairs and front curtain. A letter signed to this effect by Yvonne Perrott, our chairman, and Charles Hadfield, chairman of the village hall. 3 theatre trips took place in 1968. In 1969, the players had 31 members, but not all had paid up, and in future, those who did not pay would have notices delivered to their doors. Where would we be without email? Some of you may well remember Dorling's shop, where the best cooked ham ever was sold. You will see a photograph of the shop before it was expanded. Mr. Dorling and his wife Janet were agents for selling tickets for the plays for many years. This year, 1969, the play was performed, Who Lies There? The Standard did not give a very good report, neither did the Advertiser. For the next play, it was decided to contact the Echo. Before the performances of plays began, the national anthem was always played, and this year my mother did the honours. 1970 saw the start of the rehearsals for the farcical play Pickles in Paradise. This was postponed due to the split-second timing it took. You will notice on the programme Jane Cousins did the makeup. Jane became a West End actress in her own right, and she played in a Harold Pinter play opposite Michael Gambon. This caused the talk of the village as Jane was appearing topless. My husband and I went up to see the play, but my husband insisted we sat in the front row so we had a good view. Jane lived in Brook House, just a few houses away from the village hall. On the photograph you see on the screen now is me as a younger me. You wouldn't recognise me now. My brother Andrew, and in the middle, Tom Fenton. In the top left-hand corner, you will see a photograph of Molly Plain. Molly always reminded us of Margaret Rutherford. Molly always played the character of a maid and put her own interpretation on her role. Her timing was so good and always amused the audience. 1971 saw the production Mist Over Mistletoe, and rehearsals were held at Atkins Manor. The village newsletter was used to advertise the play, and it was noted that tea and biscuits were sold in the interval, 2 new pence a cup. The Trust had written to the players regarding the old school in the lane. They thought it would be a good place to store the flats and costumes and maybe even hold rehearsals. The old school was eventually sold off by the council, and therefore village organisations never had a chance to use it. The village hall had raised their fees due to a building, a new meeting room and kitchen. It was proposed that fees for old-age pensioners to buy a ticket at half price. Junior members could join for the fee of 5 new pence. I used this old photograph of the school to illustrate the building with the thatched roof. This has obviously now been changed. This old photograph came from the Trust's archive and was given by my great-grandmother, Granny Polly. All for the Shore was a production in April 1976, and you will note that the admission by programme was 30p and the seats were actually numbered. I particularly wanted this one to show Bill Fletcher. Bill Fletcher was a huge asset to the South Cerney players, a very talented and clever man. He did a lot of the programmes, he did sketches, he wrote so many things for the players. He was a very clever man inasmuch he would compile crosswords for the Daily Telegraph, the cryptic ones, not the easy ones. Bill's claim to fame was he could stand up at any time and recite a monologue, his favourite being the green eye of the little yellow god from Kathmandu. The 1977 Village Jubilee Committee asked the players to do a 10 to 15-minute slot at the Jubilee Music Hall. Bill Fletcher accepted the challenge for writing this. On the programme you will note some familiar names. Keith Greenwood, who was the headmaster of the New Kings Hill School, David Hutchin, a teacher at this school, David Dunn, our then local plumber, and Robert Cowley, who was our present clerk to the parish council. 1977 was a busy year for the players because they put on an autumn production of a pantomime, the first ever. This was written by Bill Fletcher and made a profit because we didn't have to pay any royalties. It drew in many new members. In 1995, our village saw the 50 years commemoration review in the village hall. In May this year, we celebrate our 75 years of the VE Day. In the centre picture, you'll see Tony Tipper playing his harmonica. Tony was a great member of the players. Backstage, acting, you name it, Tony could do it. Tony was also a long member of the South Cerney Trust. His job in the trust was to walk the footpaths and report each year on the state of the footpaths around the village. On the programme you will see a member of the players, Tony Squire, and he read a monologue the day war broke out. Now we're all wondering when we can break out of our homes during this lockdown, during this terrible virus. I would now like to talk about Mr. and Mrs. Mair, Jim and Thelma. Jim, a very talented artist, and he designed the posters for Alibaba, gave each of the 40 thieves a poster to colour in and pin up around the village. Just as an aside, Jim loved the summer holidays and would often be up the meadows, actually laying in the river to cool down. As we walked past, we would always pretend not to see him. Now, Thelma, her nephew, was Robbie Coltrane, and this is a link to Harry Potter and School Lane and Old Tiles. As you know, Robbie Coltrane played Hagrid in the Harry Potter series. And that isn't the only connection. Old Tiles was owned by Mr. Alfred Dunn, who is my husband's uncle. Now, Alfred was the headmaster of J.K. Rowling's, and it is reputed that J.K. Rowling's based Dumbledore on Alfred Dunn, which goes on to mean that we are all muggles in the village. Here on the screen is a photograph from Tattercoats, produced in 1978, where Jenny Gardner is shown. Jenny is a long-serving member of the Trust. Also in front of Jenny is Edna Golding, a real character actress who always brought the house down. In 1981, this saw the largest ever actors on stage. This was Alibaba and the 40 Thieves. Adaptations were made by Bill Fletcher. Sue Bowman, the butcher's wife, was in charge of the dancing. Anne Seymour in charge of music. Anne was Hilda Stevens' daughter. David Croft was playing the part of Ali Baba. On the night that Stephen, his son, aged 5, was taken to watch the panto, Ali Baba swept to the front of the stage while swirling his big black cape around and roared, "Where have all the thieves gone?" Stephen piped up in a loud voice and said, "They are in the cave, Dad." Doreen Laws, who joined the players in the early 60s, played the part of the Wicked Fairy. Doreen was a talented actress and always learnt her lines well. Jenny Gardner was cast as one of the ugly sisters. Rather unfair, I think, as Jenny is certainly not ugly. Having all the cast packed into the hut was rather difficult. Imagine trying to keep 40 young thieves quiet. At the wind-up meeting, the problem of so many in the room, plus 20 adults, plus all the costumes, did constitute a fire hazard, as electric fires hung from the walls, and some of the actors smoked in the room. Whatever would health and safety say today? In 2004, the old stage was dismantled and found to be riddled with woodworm. The players' party pieces the previous year could have seen our Cerney men disappearing through the stage, never to be seen again, whilst they were dancing the churn dance, our version of the river dance. You'll see from the photo our male dancers. In the lineup we have Charlie Kingsbury, our postmaster, Jonathan, my son, Keith Guppy, and Mark Sweet, who works so hard in the present day to keep the players going. The two larger photographs of handsome chaps is Derek Carter and Ray Thorthorpe. New staging was bought by the parish council, and the Players with the Flower Show committee donated £500. The neat storage frees up valuable space in the hall. To sum up so far, things have moved on, but some things haven't changed. For now we have a bar where we can buy a glass of wine, much easier than making cups of tea and coffee. The front of house no longer has to expel rowdy characters. In fact, they now take on the role of raffle as well. One year, Norman, who was always front of house for us, he was drawing the raffle and he drew Pink 66, which he announced several times, but no one won the prize. A second later, he announced Pink 99, and sure enough, somebody put their hand up. I did hear someone whisper that War and Peace could be read quicker. Things that haven't changed. Who's going to produce the play? Have we enough men? What should we put on? How much should we charge? These are questions never go away. Children are now allowed in at any time and do behave themselves. Of course, the problem of programmes, tickets, all those sorts of things, advertising, they are so easily remedied today with all our modern technology. Threads of two generations have run through the player's history, one being the Cripps link, and this has followed down through to Eva Fenton, the other being the Griffith link, which has passed down to Oscar and Harry Poulton. I would now like to introduce you to Angie Fenton, who will talk you through the current ruling for children performing on stage. These rules caused the cancellation of the panto last year.
When we started preparing for our biannual pantomime in early 2018, it was brought to our attention that several new safeguarding rules had been applied for the protection of children who wished to perform in any environment, whether on the West End stage or in our little village hall. These rules created issues including children requiring chaperones who would need to be trained by the council, and some children would need a performing licence issued by the district council within which they live. The need for separate changing areas, not being able to share toilet facilities with the audience, and being chaperoned in our limited backstage area are obviously things that need the most work. We unfortunately had to make the heartbreaking decision to cancel all children's involvement with the players whilst we investigated more of what would be required of us and how we could accommodate all the new rules. We know how many children are excited to take part and want to do everything we can to make this possible. Earlier this year, I visited Gloucester County Council with our treasurer, Ian Stewart, who had done a lot of research, and we met with the Children's Inclusion Officer, an extremely helpful and positive lady with whom we're now working to ensure that everything is in place for our next proposed pantomime in autumn 2021. There are a lot of hoops to jump through, but we feel the benefit to the children who are involved is worth it. Hopefully, we'll be able to have a full cast and crew involving the children of the village, as we always used to do.
Hello, here I am again. I hope I didn't wake you and that you were not too bored. It has been a really strange experience talking to myself all this time. I must not get in the habit of it. My thanks must go to Derek and Angie for their help. It was such a shame that the last play could not be performed due to this virus situation. Actors and backstage work so hard and give up so much of their time to entertain us all. But I feel confident that the show will go on. If you haven't been to a performance before, I really heartily recommend them. They will keep you entertained, I can assure you. If you would like further information on the South Cerney players, and I haven't put you off, they do have a website which you can look on. I'll now say goodbye, stay safe and keep well.